Know Your Rights.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Know Your Rights. In this episode, we're planning to raise awareness on the current legal position of LGBTQ rights in Sri Lanka. Today, I have with me Mr. Aritha Wickramasinghe, who is a solicitor and also the Equality Director at Hyper Bono. Welcome to Know Your Rights, Aritha.
Thank you for having me.
So, Aritha, what does the term LGBTQ stand for?
So LGBTQ is a term which we use to describe the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community. Lesbians means a woman who is emotionally, sexually, or romantically attracted to another woman. G stands for gay, that's generally a gay man. So a man who is emotionally, romantically, and sexually attracted to another man. B is for bisexuals. Those are persons who will have those same attractions to both genders. T is for transgender persons. These are persons who identify with a gender that is different to the sex that is assigned to them at birth. And Q is for queer. That really means people who who don't necessarily fit in with the societal expectations of gender and behaviors, and are just different. So anyone who's different.
Yeah, so LGBTQ is only an umbrella term, right? Because now we find LGBTQIA+, which is more inclusive. So what are these other variants?
Yeah, it's an umbrella term, and of course you can include I and A as well if you want, or you don't have to, you can just say LGBT+. I stands for intersex. Intersex are persons who are actually born with the sex characteristics of either both sexes or of neither sexes. And A stands for asexuals. These are persons who don't have any sexual attractions to any of the genders. A can also include allies who are heterosexual, straight supporters of the rights of LGBTQ persons.
Right. So two terms that we refer to when we talk about LGBTQ rights is sexual orientation and gender identity. So what are these terms?
Sexual orientation is another term for which defines the emotional, romantic, and sexual attractions that you have as an individual. Whereas gender identity is about what gender that you ascribe to yourself or that you identify with, whether that's a male gender, a female gender, or actually none of the genders, or non-binary as we'd call it.
Okay, so is it possible to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, by force, just so they can conform with the mainstream society?
There's been a lot of research done over the last several decades. You're looking at about 50, 60 years, probably more of research on whether sexual orientation can be changed, or whether gender identities can be changed, and whether these are choices that someone makes. I think the evidence is quite overwhelming that your sexual orientation and your gender identity, these are not diseases, these are not mental health conditions, these are natural, and these are not choices. You are born with your sexual orientation, and you are born as a transgender person. Usually our discovery of our sexual orientation and our correct gender identity may come much later in life, but I think the science and the evidence is quite overwhelming to support that these are natural human traits. It's part of human evolution, and these are not choices.
Okay. So we see, if we take the Sri Lankan society, that a lot of the people are not open to talking about LGBTQ matters. And they see it, we call it homophobia, like people have a lot of fear, hatred, or aversion, towards this community. So why is this?
Oh, that's. I think there's a lot of impact of colonialism on our attitudes towards sexual identities and gender identities. First of all, Sri Lankan society does not like to talk about sex in general or anything that is seen as remotely controversial. And a lot of this apprehension around sexual identities and conversation on sex is very much a colonial inclusion into our cultural mindset. especially during the British colonial period. You had Victorian attitudes of being very restrictive about how you talk about sexual identities and gender identities. And actually, the criminalization of LGBT people happened during the British colonial period, during the Victorian period. When we say Victorian, we mean the period when Queen Victoria was the emperor of the empire at the time, and set about introducing all these law reforms to restrict society's expression of themselves.
Yeah, but ironically, they have moved forward and they've changed their rules, and still we are having these age-old rules, isn't it?
Of course, laws have to change as society changes, as we discover new things, as we learn, as we evolve. We have to change our laws. It is impractical to have laws which were designed with a mindset of the 1800s to be applicable in the 2020s. These are laws which are about 140, 150 years apart.
Right.
Our society today is very different to the society we were 10 years ago. So we're completely different species compared to what we were about 150 years ago. So these laws need to change.
Yeah, that's right. And also, some of the people, they believe that this, LGBTQ, so the whole concept is coming from the West, and it's been imported to our country, so they're quite, not really ready to accept it. But is this true? I mean, if you go back thousands of years, haven't there always been a community?
Of course, LGBT people have existed as part of human evolution in every society, especially Asian society. LGBTQ individuals were not only fully functioning and full citizens of these societies, but also quite venerated citizens. When we look at South Asian history, you see a lot of prominent LGBT individuals throughout history. You have kings and queens who had same-sex relationships. When you look at India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, transgender individuals have always had a almost spiritual and holy position in that society. In fact, it is criminalization of these communities, and it is homophobia and transphobia that is Western. What is Eastern is acceptance and celebration of this diversity, not the fear and hatred that we have actually adopted from Western ideals, and now we are promoting them as if they are our own ideals, but they're not.
How about Sri Lanka? Do you have any examples, going back,
Yeah, there is actually, I can't remember off my head, but there is a Sri Lankan king who had same-sex relationships, and that is noted in the Mahavansa. And when you also look at Buddhist texts, there is references to same-sex relationships in Buddhist texts, and transgender people have always existed in Sri Lankan society, and you have reference to them throughout history.
Okay, so why do you think that people need to be more aware of the existence of this community and their issues? There's also a myth that, having access to information regarding LGBTQ community can endanger children. What are your ideas on that?
I mean, people need to be aware of the LGBT community and know about their struggles, because LGBT people exist. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. LGBT people exist, they're here, they need to be visible and they need to be recognized. And they also suffer a lot of discrimination because of these laws and because of attitudes. You're looking at, access to jobs, access to healthcare, access to decent life. Everyone is entitled to these rights, including the LGBT community. This sort of conflation between LGBT individuals as being predators of children.
So, is there any link between homosexuality and child abuse as suggested by certain factions in our society? Does it really endanger children?
No, I mean, there's absolutely no link between homosexuality and child abuse. Anyone being an LGBT person does not increase their chance of abusing children. That's just pure homophobia and transphobia. If you look, Rajeevi, at the vast majority of child rape and child sexual abuse that's being committed, it's committed by heterosexual people against children. Mostly heterosexual men are raping young girls, but we don't say if you look at the statistics, you can actually put an argument that there's a link between heterosexuality and child abuse, because it's mainly heterosexual men who are committing the rapes and abuse. Almost 100% of rapes against women are being committed by heterosexual men. So there's zero link that way. I don't think your sexual orientation determines whether you are going to be a rapist or a child abuser. I think that is an individual responsibility, and you have to blame the individual, not their sexual orientation, not their race or religion. None of those factors determine whether you're going to be a child molester or abuser. Those are perverts, and those are abusers, and they have to be labeled exactly as that.
Yes. So what is your message to the general public?
My message is you need to accept people for who they are, and you need to respect people for who they are. You need to value every individual for what they bring to the table, and people need to be treasured for their contributions. Who someone falls in love with, their race, their religion, even their gender, those things are really irrelevant on how you value an individual human being. And if you have an LGBT brother, sister, friend, work colleague, you need to be open to them, and you need to, if you're a really true friend, if you really love someone, you need to accept them. So that's my message.
Thank you very much for joining with us today. If you have any questions on this topic, please write to us at info@knowyourrights.lk or send us a Facebook message. We will be joining with you again with another episode. I'm Rajeevi Mapalagama. Thank you.